All right, thanks everyone. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jodene Baker, and I am Vice President, Research, Advocacy, and External Relations at Imagine Canada. It's my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to everyone here. We're so happy to have you all join us for this deep dive into the rules that charities and nonprofits must follow when engaging in any election activity. However, before we get into that conversation, we'd like to begin by taking a moment to acknowledge the physical lands that we're joining in from today, even during a virtual event. Imagine Canada's staff, operations, work, and network depend on traditional Indigenous territories to provide us physical space, sustenance, safety, and community to work, live, and play. Our physical head office is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. We acknowledge that these lands are covered by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. We also acknowledge that these lands are still home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Personally, I am joining you today from Winnipeg, which is located in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge that our ability to live and work on these lands today is a direct benefit of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the time of settlement and confederation and since. The harms of these policies are many and are still being felt in Indigenous communities today. We express gratitude towards the Indigenous peoples who have and will continue to steward these lands. We commit to amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples and working against the everyday forces of white supremacy and colonialism present in the nonprofit sector. Our team at Imagine Canada is actively engaging in training and education related to reconciliation and decolonization. We aim to listen, learn, establish meaningful relationships with our Indigenous sector colleagues, engage in courageous conversation, and take actions that advance reconciliation in the nonprofit sector. As we're all joining in remotely, I'd like to just pause and take a short moment for us all to reflect on the lands on which each of us are situated, the land that each of us is living on, working on, the land that's allowing us to join in as this virtual community today. Thank you. Today, our guest speakers will each give a brief presentation, and then we'll have time to take some questions from the audience. Please note that you must use the official Q&A function in the Zoom, which is located at the bottom of your screen, in order to participate, as we won't be monitoring or taking questions from the chat. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation, but they'll be answered towards the end of the session. This meeting is being recorded, and you'll receive the recording within a few weeks, along with related resources. Closed captioning is enabled, and if you have further accessibility questions, please let us know in the chat. All right, now getting into the conversation and the presentations. So though we don't know exactly when, we do know that there will be a federal election on or before October 20th, 2025. The purpose of this webinar is to build the sector's awareness of rules related to engaging in elections advocacy and its capacity to advance its public policy priorities. This is just one of several election readiness activities we're organizing. On March 4th, we're hosting another webinar about effective strategies and tactics for election advocacy. You can check out the elections page on our website, which will be shared in the chat, to learn more. We encourage you to check back to that website regularly between now and the end of the election, because we will be updating it frequently. Before we get to the introductions, we'd like to thank the Tiny Foundation, the McConnell Foundation, Mastercard Foundation, and the Counselling Foundation of Canada for their support. Today, we're joined by Sharmila Biswas-Mistry, Senior Outreach Officer at Elections Canada, Amandine Le-Doan, Technical Policy Advisor at the Canada Revenue Agency, and Frantz, Advisor at the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying. We're going to begin with a presentation from Sharmila. So Sharmila, please go ahead.
Hello, and thank you to you all for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us this afternoon. As Jodene mentioned, my name is Sharmila Biswas-Mistry, and I'm part of the National Outreach Team at Elections Canada, where I oversee the Inspire Democracy program. I'm here today with my technical expert, Donna Beck, from the political financing team, who will be able to answer your questions about third party rules during the question period at the end of the presentations. I'm joining you today from the shores of the Ottawa River on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Ottawa River has served as a gathering place for trade and cultural exchange for thousands of years. And today we honor that spirit by sharing and exchanging knowledge. Next slide, please. Thank you. Today, I'll be providing you some information on the Inspire Democracy program, how not for profits can engage their community in an impartial way, and then touch upon the third party requirements if you want to go a little bit more on the influential route. But before I get there, I'd like to, you can switch the slide, please. Before we get to that information, I do want to tell you a little bit about Elections Canada and some of the work that we do. So, when a federal election is called, Elections Canada's role is to provide more than 27 million Canadian citizens who are eligible to vote the opportunity to do so. This applies to no matter where they are in Canada or the world. And please note, we don't actually have any kind of insiders information on exactly when that federal election is. Your guess is as good as mine. It's like reading tea leaves, but we never really know. We just have to be ready for when it's called. So, Elections Canada is an independent, nonpartisan agent of parliament responsible for conducting federal elections and administering the federal election legislation. And as agents of parliament, we report directly to the House of Commons and not the government of the day. And as employees, while we are allowed to vote, we must take an oath not to be that we won't be politically active anytime. And fun fact, the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada, who is Stéphane Perreault, is the only Canadian who is not allowed to vote. So as you can see, we take impartiality and nonpartisanship very seriously. And Elections Canada's mission is to ensure that Canadians can exercise their democratic right to vote and be a candidate. Next slide, please. At the very heart of everything that we do at Elections Canada, we're trying to make Canada's electoral process and system more accessible, transparent, and inclusive. My team leads the Inspire Democracy program, which was designed to identify and address informational barriers to electoral participation. We know through research that some groups of Canadians face barriers to exercising these rights. These groups are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis electors, new electors, including youth and new Canadians, and electors with disabilities. But these are not the only groups that face barriers. We know that electors in the 2S LGBTQ plus community, electors experiencing homelessness, and women running as candidates also face certain barriers. And we're also examining those barriers. And the Inspire Democracy program is meant to engage and help organizations like yours who work closely with communities that face these most pronounced difficulties to participating in elections, and the goal being is to inform electors about the tools and services that are available to them. So, why are community organizations and not-for-profits so important to federal elections? Next slide, please. So you are uniquely positioned to engage your community in the federal election for the following reasons. You have deep roots in the community. You have established trust and long-standing relationships with members of your community. You have a diverse reach. You can connect with groups that are hard to reach. You have shared goals. Many organizations have a shared goals of empowering Canadians, especially marginalized groups. And you have great cultural awareness. Organizations like your own understand the unique need, languages, and contexts of the communities you serve. So, how can you provide information about the federal election in a nonpartisan way? You can ensure all your outreach and education efforts are neutral and unbiased and prioritize dialogue over persuasion. Listen to your community's concern and provide tailored resources to address their needs. You can focus on empowering your community with information about the electoral process rather than your opinion on political parties or candidates. And you can use tools and resources that are fact based and accessible to diverse audiences. And Elections Canada can help you on that. And you can just continue and maintain trust and transparency about the electoral process and Elections Canada's role as the nonpartisan agency. And next slide. Now that you know how some of the ways that you can engage your community in an impartial way, we can look at some of the resources that we have available. So we have some toolkits that we developed in the Inspired Democracy program for community leaders like yourself to engage your membership on the three ways to participate in an election: running an election, working in an election, and registering and voting. And I just want to draw your attention to Toolkit 2, which is the working in the federal election. During every federal election, we have the monster task of hiring over 200,000 poll workers across the country. This is a very tangible way that you can help your community be engaged in the election by encouraging them to become poll workers or be some kind of paid position within the election period. And just to note that these are all paid positions, and we also pay for training. So I welcome you to go to Inspire Democracy to take a look at this. You can order physical copies and other Inspire Democracy resources. Some of them come in 33 languages other than English and French, and 17 languages, Indigenous languages. And of course, we have accessible formats. So let's switch gears a little bit. We've talked about how to, we can switch, thank you. We've talked about how to engage your community in an impartial way. Now we can talk about engaging your community in a more influential way. And if you're going to do so, you will need to follow the third party rules as per the Canada's Elections Act. So, what is a third party? So, a third party is generally a person or group that wants to participate in or influence an election other than a political as a political party, electoral district, an association, a nomination candidate, or nomination contestant or a candidate. Next slide, please. So, who can be a third party? If that's an individual, that individual has to be a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or lives in Canada. Or they can be a corporation that carries on business in Canada. And it can be also a group where a person responsible for the group is a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or lives in Canada. So, next slide, please. You know what? I'm actually going to skip this slide. Let's just go on to the next slide. Yeah, so this is a great slide that shows you a little bit of the thinking process on whether you're going to be engaged in as a third party. So if you see the first line, it says that if the election period has started, so that's when you have to start your work as a third party. And then number two is that if you fit these three criterias that we've already been through. So, and then three is if you conduct one or more of these regulated activities in the election period with a combined expense of $500 or more. And the activities include election advertising, partisan activities, and election surveys. So if you fit all these different criterias, then you must register as a third party with Elections Canada. And just a little bit of a nuance, a corporation incorporated outside of Canada cannot register as a third party if during the election period its primary purpose in Canada is to influence electors to vote or refrain from voting. So either in general or for a particular candidate or a registered party. Next slide, please. So we'll do a quick review of what exactly those three regulated activities were. So third-party activities regulated under the Canada Elections Act include partisan activities, and these are activities carried out by a third party that promotes or opposes a political party, nomination contestant, potential candidate, or party leader, other than by taking a position on an issue which the political party or person is associated. The second activity is election advertising, the transmission to the public by a third party by any means during the election period of an advertising message that promotes or opposes a registered party or candidate, including taking a position on an issue with which the registered party or person is associated. And lastly, election survey. So surveys about voting intention or choices or about an issue with which a registered party or candidate is associated that a third party conducts or causes to be conducted during the election period. The survey results are used in deciding whether to organize or carry out regulated activities or in the organization and carrying out of regulated activities. So next slide, please. So that's a lot of information, but thankfully the political financing team at Elections Canada has provided lots of information on exactly these third-party rules, and there's a whole section at elections.ca about all of this information. And next slide. So, and of course, we do have information on election resources at elections.ca and Inspire Democracy, or email me. You can email me personally. My email is right on the screen to get more information about any of the information that you see. But that's all for me, and I really appreciate your attention, and I'm looking forward to the question period. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sharmila. That was really informative. I've been taking notes myself on it, so thanks for the presentation. Before we turn it over, I will just ask folks, I see we've got a few questions lining up in the Q&A. That's great. We will get to all of them at the end. A reminder, please use that Q&A function as opposed to the chat function. If you're using chat, we may end up losing the questions and not get to them. So just a reminder to place them in the Q&A. And now for the next presentation, we are going to go over to Amandine.
So hello, everyone. Thank you to Imagine Canada for having us today and all of you for joining us. My name is Amandine Le-Doan. I'm a technical policy advisor at the CRA's Charities Directorate. And before I begin, I would just like to take the time to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Montreal, Tiohtià:ke, which is part of the traditional and unceded territory of the Kenyan Kehaka Mohawk people and is historically known as a gathering place for many Native nations. Because we are meeting virtually, I also want to acknowledge the lands you are gathered on from coast to coast to coast. So I think we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Next one, yeah, thank you. So the purpose of today's presentation is to familiarize you with the rules governing public policy, dialogue, and development activities carried out by registered charities, which are also known as PPGDAs. These rules do not apply to all nonprofits, but only to organizations that are registered charities under the Income Tax Act. So with election cycles coming up, charities may see an opportunity to highlight the policy issues that are important to them and their supporters. And the CRA recognizes that charities have an important contribution to make to the ongoing public conversations around important public policy issues facing Canadians. The Income Tax Act gives charities a lot of latitude to participate in advocacy work through PPDDAs. However, there are some rules that charities need to keep in mind when carrying out this type of work. The CRA has a detailed guidance, CG 027, that is available on our website and explains these rules and requirements, so we invite you to consult it. I'll just add the link to the chat. So next slide, please. So today we'll be starting the presentation by explaining what are PPDDAs. We'll then go on to explain the Income Tax Act requirement that a charity's PPDDAs further a stated charitable purpose of the charity. And then we'll move on to discussing the prohibition on supporting or opposing a political party or candidate for public office before wrapping up with some key reminders. Next slide. So what are PPDAs? So the term Public Policy Dialogue and Development Activities was first introduced in the Income Tax Act in 2018 when the act was amended to specify that charitable activities include PPDAs that further a stated charitable purpose. The term PPDA replaced the term political activities and was meant to encompass a broader range of activities. As a result of these changes, the quantitative limits on the amount of resources a charity could use on political activities was removed, and charities may now pursue their stated charitable purposes by carrying out PPDAs in furtherance of those purposes. So the CRA defines PPDAs as activities a charity carries out to participate in the public policy development process or to facilitate the public's participation in that process. PPDAs generally involve seeking to influence the laws, policies, or decision of government, whether in Canada or a foreign country. The types of PPDAs include providing information to inform or persuade the public in regard to public policy, conducting research into public policy, disseminating opinions on public policy, advocating to retain, oppose, or change a law, policy, or decision of any level of government in Canada or a foreign country. PPDAs can also include mobilizing others to express their support for or opposition to a particular law, policy, or decision of government. It can also include making representations to elected officials, providing forums and convening discussions between political parties and candidates on public policy issues, as well as communicating on social media to express views in regard to public policy. Next slide. So under the Income Tax Act, a charity must be constituted and operated for exclusively charitable purposes. This means that a charity's stated purposes must be charitable. A stated purpose refers to the objects or aims that are stated in the charity's governing document, such as its articles of incorporation or its constitution. A charity must also devote its resources exclusively to charitable activities in furtherance of those stated purposes. A charitable purpose fits within one of the four categories of charity that have been established by the courts. This means the relief of poverty, the advancement of education, the advancement of religion, and a fourth category of other purposes beneficial to the community in a way the law regards as charitable, which encompasses various other purposes like purposes to promote health, purposes to promote to protect the environment, and purposes to uphold human rights, for example. However, the common law provides that political purposes are not charitable. So political purposes include purposes that seek to further the interests of a political party or candidate, as well as purposes that seek to retain, oppose, or change the law, policy, or decision of any level of government in Canada or a foreign country. So this means that the purposes stated in the charity's governing document must not refer to influencing the laws, policies, or decisions of government, even if most or all of its activities are PPDAs. A charity's purpose must be stated in a way that focuses on the charitable purpose its PPDAs are intended to further rather than the PPDAs themselves. Next slide. So a charity may engage in unlimited PPDAs that further its stated charitable purposes. In other words, a charity is free to advocate for maintaining, opposing, or changing any law, policy, or decision of government in furtherance of its stated charitable purpose. For PPDA to be considered to be furthering a stated charitable purpose, it needs to meet two essential requirements. So first, the PPDA needs to relate to the charity's stated charitable purpose. And second, the PPDA must be able to provide a public benefit when considered together with the stated charitable purpose it's intended to further. So in this context, a charity could, for example, further a stated purpose to relieve poverty by carrying out PPDAs to contribute to the development of government policies in matters relating to poverty relief, or it could also further a purpose to advance education by contributing to the development of government policies in matters relating to the regulation of education. Next slide. So now that we've discussed PPDAs that charities are allowed to carry out, we'll move on to activities that are prohibited. So under the ITA, a charity can never directly or indirectly support or oppose a political party or candidate for public office. So direct support or opposition refers to situations where the charity's external messaging, which includes social media posts, website materials, publications, speeches that the charity makes, when those external messages communicate that it supports or opposes a political party or candidate, that would be considered direct support or opposition. Direct can also mean a charity that transfers resources, including financial, human, or physical resources to a political party or candidate. On the other hand, indirect support or opposition refers to situations where the charity's internal records or messaging reveal that it carried on an activity to support or oppose a political party or candidate. It can also refer to situations where a charity transfers resources to a third party to be used to oppose or support a political party or candidate. Next slide. So when it comes to the prohibition on supporting or opposing a political party or candidate, there are three key definitions that we need to keep in mind. So first, candidates. So the CRA considers that a candidate is a person who meets that specific definition in the applicable election legislation. For example, a candidate in the federal election would be a person that meets the definition of candidate in the Canada Elections Act. Second, there's political party. So the CRA considers a political party to be any organization with a fundamental purpose to participate in public affairs by endorsing one or more of its members as candidates and supporting their election. And lastly, public office. So the CRA considers that a candidate for public office refers to a candidate that is seeking election to either the House of Commons or a provincial territorial legislative assembly, a band council, a regional or municipal government, or any other similar entity. So here are some examples of prohibited direct and indirect support or opposition to a political party or candidate. In terms of direct support or opposition, a charity cannot, for example, endorse a candidate for public office over social media, cannot make a donation to a political party, cannot tell people not to vote for a political party, or send its board members to accompany a candidate in an election campaign as representatives of the charity. In terms of indirect support or opposition, it can include situations where a charity's internal documents state that it will oppose a political party that takes a different view on a certain policy issue by holding a public demonstration where that party is gathering. It can also refer to situations where a charity is assigning its staff to work for a nonprofit organization on the understanding that the staff's time will be used to support a candidate's election campaign. So despite this prohibition, there are still many ways a charity can undertake PPDAs that do not amount to supporting or opposing a political party or candidate. A charity can carry out PPDAs that support or oppose a government policy that a political party or candidate also supports or opposes, as long as in doing so, the charity does not identify the political party or candidate. A charity's PPDAs are not and will not become support or opposition of a political party or candidate simply because a political party or candidate is known to have similar views or share the same views as the charity on that particular issue. A charity can also inform the public on policy positions of all parties or candidates on a specific issue, even if it's obvious that a party or candidate shares or opposes the views of the charity. The charity can do so as long as the information is presented in a way that is neutral and doesn't highlight either favorably or unfavorably the voting patterns or the views of a particular party or candidate. A charity can also hold candidates debates as long as the charity ensures that all political parties are given an equal opportunity to present their views on the policy issue. So to provide an example as to what a charity can or cannot do, we can consider, for example, a charity whose purpose is to provide settlement assistance to newly arrived refugees and who would like to carry out PPDDs to support government policies that facilitate the issuance of work and study permits for immigrants. So in this scenario, next slide. So in this scenario, the charity can tell supporters to contact their elected officials to express their support for this type of policy, but cannot tell supporters not to vote for a political party that opposes this type of policy. The charity could also communicate its views on the policy issue as long as it does not refer to any candidate or political party. The charity can also hold a debate on the policy issue to which all political parties are invited to present their views, but it could not invite only one candidate who shares the charity's views to come speak to their supporters. The charity can also publish a voting record of all members of parliament on the policy issue, but it could not single out either positively or negatively the voting pattern of a particular political party or candidate. Next slide. So it's also important to note that the rules relating to PPDDs, including the prohibition on supporting or opposing a political party or candidate, do not apply to a charity's directors, staff, volunteers, or any other representative acting in their own personal capacity as individuals rather than on behalf of the charity. However, a charity must never use or make available its resources to support that individual's personal political involvement. So a charity's resources include its employees and volunteers, office space or office supplies, the charity's events or functions, as well as the charity's publications and online platforms. Representatives of a charity, and particularly leaders who want to speak or write in their individual capacity, should indicate that their comments are personal rather than the views of the charity. So as an example, a charity's director may be a candidate in the federal election and want to campaign. So in that case, the director is allowed to campaign on their own personal time using their own personal resources. The charity can also speak about their views outside of the charity's events and functions, but should always indicate that their views are their own and not those of the charity. On the part of the charity cannot make its resources available to support that director's campaign and should also refrain from using its events or functions, social media outlets, or publications to provide a platform for that director to campaign or express their views. This would amount to supporting a candidate for public office and is prohibited. So to close out this presentation, I'd like to provide you with some key reminders to take away. So first, PPDDs are only allowed when they further a stated charitable purpose of the charity. So a charity should not seek to oppose or change a law, decision, or policy of government that is unrelated to its stated purposes. It's also important for the charity to keep adequate books and records showing how its PPDDs further its stated charitable purposes. There is also no limit on the amount of resources a charity can use for PPDDs. So in this context, a charity may devote up to 100% of its resources to PPDDs that further its stated charitable purposes. Another important point is that a charity cannot support or oppose a political party or candidate, either directly or indirectly. So when a charity opposes or supports a decision, law, or policy of government, the charity's communications need to focus on the policy issue under discussion and refrain from referring to any candidate or political party. And lastly, other federal, provincial, and municipal legislation may also apply to a charity's PPDs, including the Canada Elections Act and the Lobbying Act, which are discussed today. So if you would like to carry out new PPDAs but are unsure whether they would comply with the Income Tax Act rules, we encourage you to reach out to our client service representatives who will be able to assist you. So if you have any further questions, maybe that are specific to your organization, this is the number to reach out to our client service representatives. And if you would like to receive recent news and updates from the CR's Charities Directorate, we also recommend that you sign up for our electronic mailing list. So that's it for me. Thank you for your time, and I hope this presentation was helpful.
Thank you so much, Amandine. That was very interesting. And I see we've got lots of questions that are coming in the Q&A. Again, we'll get to them at the end. So I'm going to keep moving along and turn it over to Frantz for our final presentation.
Hi, so my name is Frantz Cherestal from the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying. Thank you for inviting us to this webinar. I'm joined by my colleague Scott, just in case there are questions that he would be better suited to answer. So next slide, please. So what is regulated lobbying? First, it's communicating with federal officials directly, written, spoken, or indirectly through appeals to the public about a regulated matter. So legislative proposals, bills, resolutions, regulation, policies, programs, awarding of grants, contributions, and other financial benefits. And for consultant lobbyists only, it also includes the awarding of contracts and the arranging a meeting between an official and any other person, even if that meeting does not pertain to lobbying. And that's done either on behalf of a client or for an employer. And consultant lobbyists need to register within 10 days of agreeing to undertake a lobbying activity on behalf of a client. And for in-house lobbyists, it would be the responsible officer for that organization or corporation who would have to register their entity. They would have 2 months to do so from the point that they meet the significant part of duty threshold, so the 20%. Next slide, please. And so when I say federal officials or public office holders, just know that those two terms mean the same thing to us. So who are public office holders? It's almost all federal employees, officers and executives, members of the armed forces and RCMP, staff of parliamentarians, and all designated officials. So communicating with them may require you to register in the Registry of Lobbyists. And a portion of public office holders are also considered to be designated. So that includes all parliamentarians, Senate and House of Commons, including the Prime Minister, ministers and ministers of state, ministerial staff, most senior executives, deputy ministers, CEO, associate and assistant deputies, and additional positions set by regulation. So the reason it's important to make that distinction is because communicating with them, additionally to your registration, may require you as a if you're a lobbyist, obviously, to submit monthly communication reports. Now, the way to determine who is designated and who's not is when you contact public office holders, just ask them and they would let you know. Next slide, please. And so all individuals who must be identified as a lobbyist in the Registry of Lobbyists are also subject to the Code of Conduct. And the reason for the code is to foster transparent and ethical lobbying. And there are 4 core sections: disclosure, trustworthiness, gifts, and hospitality. But for the purpose of this webinar, I'll concentrate on the sense of obligation. So next slide, please. So never lobby an official where the official could reasonably be seen to have a sense of obligation towards you because you have a close relationship with the official, or because of political work that you did, paid or unpaid, for the benefit of the official, unless the cooling off period has expired, and never lobby an official where the official could reasonably be seen to have a sense of obligation toward you in circumstances beyond the scope of the other rules in the code. Next slide, please. All right, so political work is paid or unpaid work of a political or partisan nature during or between election periods for the benefit of an official. This includes any role, function, or task performed when the official was a nomination contestant, leadership contestant, or election candidate. For the official's political party, including any affiliated electoral district association. So if you held a leadership or senior political role and perform political role performed for the official or their political party, or other political roles, functions, or tasks that involve frequent and extensive interaction with the official, then you would be subject to a cooling off period of 24 months. That means you will not be able to lobby that specific official. And if, just one sec. Okay, and other political roles, functions, or tasks. Okay, sorry. What I meant is the first part where it's just leadership of senior political roles performed for the official, that's the 24 months. The second one is other political role functions or tasks, so extensive interactions, but also performed on a full-time or near full-time basis for the official or their political party. So that's only 12-month cooling off period. And lastly, engaging in fundraising that could reasonably be seen to be significant to the official would mean a 12-month or less cooling off period. And again, I want to emphasize those cooling off periods are toward that specific official. So if you did political work for Justin Trudeau, for example, you would not be prohibited from lobbying the entire Liberal Party, for example. It would be just Justin Trudeau. Next slide, please. So political work, the examples are serving as a designated spokesperson, serving as a campaign manager, serving in a senior position in a leadership or election campaign, serving on the executive of an electoral district association, preparing a candidate or official for appearance, including speeches, debates, organizing political fundraising, political or campaign events, directing or coordinating political research or data analysis, or developing or coordinating political messaging or advertising. So those are examples that would lead to a 24-month cooling off period, whereas other political work like canvassing, fundraising, including soliciting or gathering donations, distributing or disseminating campaign material, coordinating campaign office logistics, performing political research or data analysis and analytics tasks, and carrying out political or campaign event logistics, that would lead to the 12-month cooling off period. Next, please. And political work does not include other forms of political participation, such as attending a fundraising or campaign event, personally displaying election signs or posting digital campaign material during an election period, expressing personal political opinions, making a political contribution in accordance with the election law, and being a member of a political party at any level of government in Canada. So those do not go towards the cooling off period. Next, please. Now, the compliance obligation under the Lobbying Act is registrants and lobbyists must comply with the Lobbying Act registration and filing requirements. Consultant lobbyists cannot receive and their clients cannot provide payment contingent on the outcome of the lobbying. And former designated officials must comply with the 5-year restriction on lobbying. So being non-compliant with the act can lead to an investigation by the RCMP and can result in a fine up to $200,000, up to 2 years of incarceration, and up to a 2-year lobbying ban. And an infraction regarding the code of conduct can lead to an investigation that would be conducted by our office and a report to Parliament as well. Next, please. So the Canada's Lobbying Act recognizes that free and open access to government is important. Lobbying and political work is a legitimate activity, and that the public have a right to know who is engaged in lobbying, but that registration should not impede access to the government. So obviously what I discussed was really on the surface level. We do offer information sessions that go much more in detail about the obligations, the rules, etc. So contact our office if you're interested in attending one of those. And also you can go on our website to look for more information, or you can call us or email us with any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frantz. And again, thank you to all of our panelists. We have a lot of questions coming in. And so before we dive into them, I will just let everyone know to those who maybe joined late, yes, this is being recorded and we will be sending this out in a couple of weeks or so. If we do not get to all of the questions that have been placed in the Q&A during the time we have in the 10 minutes left, we will, at Imagine Canada, will work with our panelists and their teams to answer those questions and then send it out, those answers with the recording. So the approach to the Q&As, I am just going to start with the top, which means, Sharmila, I'm suspecting that the first chunk will likely apply to you as they came in during your presentation. So I'll just go ahead and read them as they came in, and you can answer them or direct them to some of your support team. The first one, can you please speak to how people who are homeless can exercise their right to vote? My understanding is that you can't vote unless you have an address. Thanks for your help.
So that's a great question. And yeah, homeless electors have absolutely the right to vote. And there's a lot of information on how you can help facilitate that. I will drop something in the chat that kind of gives a lot of the information. And as I'm not too sure what the type of organization you are, but there are ways in which you can vouch for a person that is experiencing homelessness. Yes, you do need a proof of ID and address, but there's letters of confirmation that can be signed by food banks or shelters. So I will put that in the chat. and it's a link to information on that. And there's also, it'll also take you to all the different proof of address that we have over 50 items that can be used in combination with the others. So hopefully that gives you a way to help facilitate that.
Thank you. The next question, is a charity or nonprofit considered a corporation? Sorry, I'm just going back to this. It disappeared from my screen for a second. I'm just going to go back to it. Yeah, is a charity or nonprofit considered a corporation? And if so, just I think a suggestion the slide could be updated to capture the fact that we don't engage in business in the traditional sense.
So I will call upon my technical expert, Donna, to answer that question.
So a charity or nonprofit would fall under the category of a group. So that would require that a person responsible for the group is a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or lives in Canada.
Great. Thank you for that. The next question we have is someone just wanting to confirm that a nonprofit or a charity can be a registered third party.
Yes, as long as they meet the criteria that I just laid out in terms of the person responsible for the group.
Great, thank you. The next question, how can your organization's location become a polling station? So someone's giving some specific information saying that they work for a 2S LGBTQ+ organization in Winnipeg, and being a polling station would reduce a barrier for that community.
That's an excellent question, and I can answer that one. So when the election is called, I would recommend getting in touch with your returning officer in the location that you are talking about. They're the ones responsible for establishing polling locations for voting. But however, I would suggest that you write to me directly, because I think we can have some conversations on things that to look out for to be a polling station. There's like a whole list of 14 accessibility criterias that every polling station must meet to make sure that they can service their the Canadians in that area. But I would love to have this conversation, and I will drop my my email again in the chat, so we can continue this conversation.
Great, thanks, Sharmila. I think the questions might now pivot to Amandine, but the panelists can let me know who is best positioned to answer it. So our next question is, can you go into further detail about the partisan activities definition? And they have the quote, other than by taking a position on an issue with which the political party or a person is associated. Does that mean we can talk about the issues, encourage the parties to come up with a position, or illustrate a policy position in their platform that we would recommend, so long as we are nonpartisan? Oh, Amandine, I think you're on mute still.
So I'm sorry, I believe they're referring to the Elections Act.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in the presentation, there's a link to the Political Financing Handbook that goes into a lot more detail and provides examples about partisan activity. So partisan activity, in order for it to be considered a regulated activity, would have to promote or oppose a registered or eligible party, or the election of a candidate, potential candidate, or leader of a registered or eligible party. So if you're being nonpartisan and you're not promoting the election of a party or a candidate, then it wouldn't be considered a regulated activity under the partisan activities. But there's a lot of information in the handbook, and I would encourage you to look at that just to make sure. And then if you have any questions, you can email or call Elections Canada to see if you might fall under a regulated activity.
Great, thank you. And I think related to this, our next question is, if an issue is associated with all parties and is addressed in a nonpartisan way and with reference to policies from across the political spectrum, is this considered election advertising?
So election advertising, you'd have to look at the definition of election advertising first, and it talks about promoting or opposing a candidate or the election of a party as well. And it includes taking a position on which a candidate or a party is associated. So if you're, and the reason we talk about taking a position on an issue with which a candidate or a party is associated is that even though you don't name the party or candidate, by supporting their issue, an issue with which they're associated, you're basically in fact promoting them. So if you're talking about a policy that is supported by all parties across the political spectrum, and you're doing advertising that's in a nonpartisan way, so that's not directly, sort of indirectly promoting or opposing the election of a party, it may not be considered election advertising. Again, the handbook goes into a lot more detail and talks about what happens if you are doing election advertising on an issue and it becomes associated with a particular candidate or party, and what steps you can take or what you would have to do if you decide to continue on with that activity.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Donna. The next question is someone asking if we can access information on who is a third party in Canada, and just a little bit of a side note that it would be interesting to see how many fossil fuel and extractive corporations are registered. So can people access that information?
There's a listing on Elections Canada's website about who registered for the last election, so that you can access. And if you're not able to find it on our website, then you can call or email us and we can provide you the link to that.
Okay, thanks, Donna, that's helpful. The next question is wondering about surveys around platform priorities to all candidates. I've been guessing if a survey is sent to all candidates around platform priorities.
So I'm assuming they're wondering whether that would be considered an election survey under the
Mm-hmm.
Canada Elections Act. For an election survey, it has to have two components. One, that you've done the survey about voting intentions or an issue, and then the second is that you use it to plan or to organize a regulated activity. So if you just do the survey itself, it may not meet the definition of election survey, and it may not be a regulated activity. It depends on what you do with the results of the survey.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I think I'm going to do one more question from our question box. We have so many in there, and I appreciate that, but one more, we just are bumping up against time. So the last question for today, is there any clarification on what it means for an issue to be, and then the quotes, associated with a party or candidate? So many issues are covered by all candidates and platforms, but with different levels of emphasis or different commitments. So what does it mean for the issue to be associated with a specific party?
So first of all, this is not something Elections Canada monitors, whether or not a third party or an activity issue advertising has become associated with a candidate or party. It would be, if it is brought to our attention based on a complaint, then we would look into it. But what you need to look at is how closely it may be wording, it may be the messaging around the issue. And the more closely that reflects what's being said by a candidate or a party, the more likely it is that it would be considered to be closely associated with them. So the broader the perspective, if you're talking about the environment in general, then that is less likely to be considered closely associated with a specific candidate or party. And again, there's more information in the Political Financing Handbook that you can look at, and some examples. And if you have any questions, you can email or contact us.
Thank you so much, Donna. So we are running out of time, so just a couple final thoughts. So I will say again, we're not going to just let these questions go unanswered. We will work with our panelists and their teams to provide some answers and send them out with our resources. I know this was a lot of amazing information today. I also want to highlight that all of our panelists today have shared their contact information, and I know they would welcome you to contact them directly with those specific questions. I think a lot of you are thinking about the engagement you're planning to do, and I'm so encouraged to see that volume of questions, because we do want the nonprofit sector, the charities and nonprofits, to be engaged in the upcoming election. And we appreciate everyone, the panelists here today, to help explain to us the rules so that we can do so in a way that is in line. So with that, I would just like to once again say thank you to Sharmila, Amandine, and Frantz for joining us today. We really do appreciate you and your team who joined us today, sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today in the audience. Again, it's so great to see so many people interested in advocacy and public policy. We will share a recording in the next few weeks, along with some of the answers to the questions that we weren't able to get to today. A final reminder, please register for our next election readiness webinar coming up on March 4th. And check out the elections section of our website for all of the latest elections content. Both are being shared in the chat with you now. with that, I will wish all of you a great end to your day and hopefully see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.